Welcome, everyone. We are recording our community practice call on Agile software development and Holacracy, part of our tributaries of Holacracy topic, where we're exploring various influences in the development of Holacracy and various methods, models, principles, systems that are in some way aligned and have in some way contributed to the evolution of Holacracy itself. And today we're exploring Agile software development as one of those tributaries that had an influence in Holacracy's development. And to help me do that today, we've got Alexei Bowers with us here.
Hello.
Lex. Great. And Lex, you've joined us on one of these calls before. I suppose in the history of Holacracy, you have a close relationship with it, having been at Ternary Software, where we first started this incubation that led to what we now call Holacracy. And at Ternary Software, we also were a software firm doing a whole bunch of software development using Agile methods and principles. So I think that makes you perfectly qualified to dig in and look at some of the history here and explore it together. So let's dive in. I didn't have any pre-established agenda or questions. I thought we'd just kind of explore what was the history, how did Agile influence the early days of this, and maybe before we dive into that, just a frame for anyone that is listening that isn't familiar with Agile software development. Let me pose a question. What is Agile software development? How would you characterize it or describe it for somebody that wasn't familiar?
Yeah, that can be kind of a long answer without knowing the history of kind of how software was built. But usually when I try to explain it to people, not being an expert in the Agile field at all, I usually start with how software, just like a lot of things that we have in companies today, sort of was following the same production cycles as more things that had been built in factories before. So we have a lot of they call upfront planning, they call it waterfall planning for project management, where you design everything up front and then you try to build it. And that works a lot in a more of a factory setting, but we find with software it's much more I don't know, more plastic, so you can actually change it more easily after you've started building it. And this was something that they were just running into trouble, where they're just building stuff that has been obsoleted by the time they've actually designed it out and written all the documents. So they're finding out it's working.
Some great stats about that, actually, that look at the waterfall approach to building software, where everything is designed, requirements are gathered, then you do all your design, you do all your planning, you do all your coding, you do all your testing, and then finally you deploy as kind of a series of steps, each flowing into the next. There was a study that looked at that method and found that of the features built in a software product built with a waterfall method, about 49% are never used by the target user. Which I think is an interesting stat, and it's no wonder when you're telling people to all up front try to anticipate everything they might need. You're asking them to predict and control. And in fact, that entire waterfall method is built on what we call predict and control as a management paradigm, where we try to achieve control through trying to predict reality in advance up front and then lock down controls to make sure reality goes according to our plan, whatever the reality might be, thus providing a very comforting illusion of control that we have done our work, we have predicted everything in advance, and we have locked and rigidly controlled towards it. So it's the broader mindset in our business world and business culture. It was natural that originally it was applied to software, and then it started not working. And I think it has its limits in any process, even in factory manufacturing. You look at what Toyota's done in the lean world, and they also have challenged at the fundamental core that method of construction. But it's especially relevant in software, I think, partly because it's such a high-tech, fast-moving world to begin with. It's so complex. The complexity when you're building a software product is just astronomical. There are so many moving parts, and it's such the design and development process is so has so many fingers and threads, and it's a very complex endeavor.
And you
And
can't
that
really,
really
in the end, you really can't design everything up front. There's a lot that as a developer, a software developer, you have to guess. I mean, when you get down in it, it's that you think you could have put in all the requirements and all the detailed specs, but when you come down to it, technology is changing, the code is changing. Some things that you think that you might have wanted as a customer really isn't going to translate to software, or maybe more expensive than what you really wanted, but you just put down what you thought you could get. And that was one of the challenges that they found, was that the customers weren't really being served. The software wasn't really being served. They were getting a lot of documentation, which nobody can really, there's too much documentation, nobody reads it. It's not software. You're buying software. You're trying to build software. People don't use documentation the way they use software. And there's such a creative process with software development of creating and specifying this software that's going to do things that people are going to interact with. People get very creative with how they interact with in ways you don't anticipate. So it's just so hard to, I mean, you can do it, but it's not going to give you the same quality that you can get if you can actually respond to your market, imagine that, or your customer, or the user base.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, as you were talking, it occurred to me there's a parallel between what you had said about in the predict and control or waterfall approach to building software. You try to figure out in advance everything you think the software needs and specify it in a series of specifications. And the fallacy of that is that you can predict up front. And you said, I know you've been in numerous Agile software development projects on the development side, as well as on the client side. And on the development side, it doesn't matter how much that client thinks that they have outlined everything, they haven't. There's missing features. And it's not all that different than what happens in job descriptions in the conventional way of structuring a business, right? And there's a parallel to Holacracy there. So you see a job description exercise, it has the same feeling of course, we'll just step back and think about everything up front that we need these different roles to do, and we'll lock it all down, we'll document it all up, and then, bam, we figured out everything, right? And of course, those job descriptions get to people's desks, and, you know, then they encounter the reality of what they actually need to do in their job, and there's just so much that isn't covered. And this is true even days after a job description exercise. It's not just that it gets stale over time, it's even immediately after the job description drafting has been done with a full study behind it and all of that. It is obsolete within hours, if not days, in that it just has not captured everything at a level of detail that gives helpful guidance. And yet we still try to design our businesses that way, just like we once tried to design software that way. And I think that's what one of the remarkable things that Agile did for software development. Agile's I describe it as a family of methodologies that all share some common principles and a common paradigm. So there are many different Agile methods, and they each implement different processes to kind of express it a little differently. But what all of the Agile methods have in common is a root paradigm, and one that tries to achieve control not through a predict and control method, but through embracing change. So it's a dynamic control paradigm. It's one that says we actually achieve more control not by trying to hold to our upfront predicted illusions, but instead by ruthlessly facing reality and adapting continually. And you know that is the core of what we call dynamic steering. And I think this is probably the biggest contribution that the whole Agile movement and our work with Agile, having run a software company that ran projects through an Agile method, it was this just real deep attunement to the value of achieving dynamic control through dynamic steering, and the fallacy of our predict and control approaches to business that simply didn't work in complex systems. And if there's anything that meets the definition of complex system, I think it's an organization itself. It's easy enough to see why our software is complex systems. Our organizations are damn complex. And trying to achieve control through a predict and control paradigm is even more difficult than trying to do it in software. And And ironically, that's I think one of the things in a lot of companies employing agile methods, one of the limitations they run into is the broader business around them is still trying to achieve control through a predict and control paradigm. So the agile team runs into management structures and budget processes and procurement processes and all these other things around it that push against the root paradigm at play under the agile methods. I really saw that a lot. And I think if we look at our own history in our software company that led to Holacracy, I think a lot of it was trying to take these agile principles and then just feeling how almost ridiculous or silly our conventional business processes look. And we had various advisors, and you can see how businesses are structured in the modern world. And for me, when we were running that software company, whenever anyone would push us in that direction, give us advice that we needed to in any way try to use a predict and control approach to structure the business, it just felt terrible. It felt wrong. And the question became, well, what's going on here, and how do we achieve a more dynamic control?
I think some of the brilliance of Agile, I mean, I'm sure different people have different ideas of this, but some of the brilliance of it was that this paradigm, what they said was, we've got this waterfall way of doing things, it's just not working, and the way people were trying to fix it was to make it more stringent, to do more of it, and they said, why don't we just change the way we do things? Let's focus on the software and the customer. Let's focus on reality and feedback and building things as opposed to writing about building things. And I think, there's always going to be a little bit of value of planning your software or getting clear on requirements, making sure that you understand with the customer, for example, what they're really trying to get. But they said, hey, why don't we do that in real time so that we can look at it as we're doing it and we can change it as, I guess we talked about ternary a lot, changing the tires while the car is going. Rather than just having to stop and change the tires, you don't have to anticipate the terrain. And that's some of what you really saw with Agile was, hey, reality is there, let's work with it. We've got all these wonderful people with ideas, users that are going to use the software. Why don't we ask them to look at it and build it in such a way that we can integrate their feedback in real time rather than having to do it up front?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it seems like that change the tires at 90 miles an hour kind of thing. It's the starting where you are as you're moving and continually adapting principles that are there. And it's there's something that the Agile methods do that I think is pretty incredible about that. It's the ruthlessly facing reality, dropping all those illusions that we have that it's going to be our perfect predicted thing, and then just facing it and continually integrating whatever you see in reality. So there's a continual integration process as well. What are we learning as we actually develop? What are we develop software? What are we learning as we engage our customers in using this software? So there's a continual processing, continual integration. And I think we see how that informed a lot of what we developed in Holacracy as well. It's a continual integration process of new information, new learning, new wisdom. And so it's again all about this underlying control mechanism. Now we're doing it by facing reality and continually processing whatever it is that comes up. And that's a big change.
I think the element of discipline is also something that is often overlooked as far as one of the really big pieces of Agile software development is not just, hey, let's just do whatever, hey, we're doing Agile because we're doing it, we're responding to the customer. It was more about adding in discipline. And actually one of the beauties of it, and I think we've sort of parallelized this with Holacracy, is using the things that are unique in software development to build safeguards so that you can go faster. So if anybody's familiar with automated testing and writing tests, that is exactly enabled by software development. It's unique to it. So using the strengths of software development to help make sure that your software development comes out safer, that it has the structures that you need so that you have less bugs, that you can change things without worrying about breaking things. And I think we see that a lot in Holacracy, and a lot of our structures are more about what are the outputs of meetings and the processes within the meetings and the discipline that it takes to follow these practices all the time is really what's getting you a lot of your value, not just the principles and the ideas of the paradigm shift, but also I really think that's one of the things that Agile teaches us is, I mean, you have that in all fields, but discipline is very important. Just because you're changing the paradigm doesn't mean that you can be lax in the discipline. You're just changing the practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing worth highlighting there is what the Agile methods did was not just throw out predict and control to go backwards to chaos, which is what happened in the software industry before there were predict and control waterfall processes. There was chaos. There was just, you go and do stuff without any control or structure to guide you whatsoever. And that doesn't scale well. So what Agile did was make it safe to go fast and to face reality and adapt continually. And they did that through supporting process and structures. And that, to me, is what was so remarkable about them. They made it safe to do 10 production updates in a single day because there are supporting process and structures to make that useful and workable instead of chaos. And likewise, they made it workable to change your requirements on the fly as you go by putting in place the processes needed to get there. And I think that's interesting, and I see one of the comments here in the chat from Eric. One of the key ideas in Agile was this idea of people over process, revaluing the human element of software development. And it's interesting. I think in context, there's a lot in that that comment. And I think, Eric, you've hit on some of it here by saying it was about counteracting how process-heavy things have become. And I'd add one little slight twist on that. In the waterfall method, it wasn't just process-heavy. It certainly was. It was process that was misaligned with reality. So it was process that had become almost process for process sake, or process through an artificial means to achieve control that didn't actually work. And when structure and process is done right, it becomes invisible and it liberates a human creativity to blossom on top of it. So actually, the irony is, despite that comment in the Agile manifesto, Agile is all about process. It's just about lightweight organic process that gets process out of the way. And that, I think, we also see embedded in Holacracy as well. Holacracy is all about the process and the structure and the rules. And it's lightweight organic process that gets process out of the way and allows humans to bring in and express their full creativity and capacity within that process held well. So one of my favorite quotes is by David Allen, author of Getting Things Done, who says about structure, those two yellow lines in the center of the road, well, that's structure, but rarely do people perceive it as limiting, as constraining, uncomfortable structure. It allows you to drive fast. When structure is done well, it fades away, you don't notice it, and it liberates speed and freedom by constraining, which is the interesting thing. It adds constraints. Something I learned from you, Lex, long ago. Structure is both limiting and enabling. And what we do, what the Agile methods did, was find the structure that is kind of requisite or natural. It is constraining and limiting, absolutely, in the most organic, natural, healthy possible way to allow the freedom to express creative software development on top of it.
Well, I think that people over process in software development isn't quite what it sounds like. I think it's more about feedback over process. And that's really, because when you talk about software, there's an end user. There's always an end user. Usually it's a human. More often than not, it's a human. So it was really about, let's find out, let's talk to each other, which I think that is not always the first instinct for a lot of software developers. So that was a pretty good reminder, but I think we see that also in Holacracy is let's get real feedback. And maybe that's from people, usually it is, but in this case for an organization, it's not just people, it's environment and things like that. I haven't been involved in the Agile community for a number of years, so I'm not sure if there's more focus on well, I know that there's always been focus on, well, what does the market say, or just depending on the context of your software. So I can't really generalize completely as to where they are now, but especially at the time, it was really about let's talk to the person that knows the answer, or not knows the answer, but could give us an answer if they looked at it. And that was really about, I think, really what it came to for me was let's talk, instead of guessing what we're going to want, let's show it. Let's try it. Let's play with it. Let's use it. And I think that's sort of what we see. That's what we're talking about in Holacracy. Let's give it a try, and let's see if it works, rather than guessing if it's going to work, until we have enough data.
Yeah, which is, to Eric's comment here, the focus is on communication, collaboration, and feedback. So there's a constant feedback loop coming in, and the adapting through it, and recognizing that when we have the right process in place to get the communication, collaboration, and feedback, it allows the process to fade to the background, and instead for us to get great feedback continually integrated to produce software that's needed by somebody. And that's, again, all shows up heavily in Holacracy. It is all about integrating continual learning, feedback, communication, collaboration, and it's doing it by having a lightweight process that's there that gets the stuff out of the way. And in Agile software development, the stuff is some of our tendency to predict and control and all this stuff. In Holacracy, there's a lot of other stuff as well we have to get rid of or get out of the way. We have to get all of the politics and dramas that happen in organization. Just get that out of the way so that we get true collaboration around the purpose without all that baggage, without all that stuff. And all of that is really, really at play there. So, yeah, I think that's some of the core influence. And, it's... I think of all of the different influencing factors on Holacracy and its development, the Agile principles really are some of the biggest. Not as much the methods. The Agile software methodologies and processes are great for building software, not so great for building organizations. I mean, they're great for what they do when they do touch the piece of how we organize, but they're not meant to. They're focused on how we build software together and how we organize around building software. But where the Agile methods stop is when it gets beyond that. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of the Agile teams I've spoken with and worked with have had. How do we take these principles and apply them to the rest of the company? How do we, take our really cool Agile team and not have it butt heads with the conventional budgeting process and management process and all this ridiculous predict and control stuff in the organization around us? And that's where so when I say I think Agile was one of the biggest influences, it wasn't in the specific processes, but it was in something deeper. It was in the deeper principles and wisdom and paradigm. All of the stuff we talk about dynamic steering, which is infused in Holacracy, all of that wisdom in self-organization, absolutely. Feedback, learning, the continual integration, all of that stuff. For us, we really learned to embody that through doing Agile software development.
I think regular meetings is also, it sounds very silly, but that's one of the things that is in most Agile software development processes is a regular meeting that you do no matter what. And I think that might also be something that was, yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting. I see another comment here that points to something I was sensing along the lines of the people over process idea in Agile. I see in the broader Agile community, at least when I was involved in it, and it's been several years now, but we were pretty deeply enmeshed in that. And it occurred to me there was almost like two tiers almost of Agile understanding and practice, at least that I could identify out there. At least two beyond, we're not really doing Agile, we just think we are. But once you get through that and you get a team that's really, really doing something that you would describe as Agile, there's kind of the first wave, which seemed to be almost more people-centric, almost to a limit. And then there were the more exception was a leap beyond that to holding Agile in a very different way and working with people in a different light. And actually, for those familiar with the Agile movement, what I thought was the best embodiment of those two kind of different tiers of understanding and practice of Agile was in Kent Beck's book. Kent was the originator of extreme programming, which is one of the Agile methodologies. And I know Kent through numerous events in the Agile industry that we um, speak at and get together at. He wrote a book, Extreme Programming Explained, which was kind of the seminal work in the extreme programming Agile methodology. Great book. And he had 2 editions of it. And the second edition I thought was fascinating because it was a complete rewrite. It wasn't just a few things tweaked. It was a totally different book. And those 2 editions of that book, to me, expressed these 2 different tiers in the Agile world. The first edition was very much push back against the waterfall. It was like differentiate from waterfall, push against it. It was very much all about the people and just in a kind of almost a limiting way. And it was still better than what came before. But it was really it was fascinating. It had there was an anger you could almost hear in the writing, and the resistance or push against the conventional business processes and the waterfall stuff and all that. And then the second edition of the book, which I found just liberating, and it was actually having read the second edition that prompted me to reach out and connect with Kent. The second edition had this maturity in it, and it was no longer a just push against and fight and differentiate. It was recognized, that is where it is. And it was no longer about, it's all about us. It was now about, no, there's a purpose here. It went from all about the people to all about the purpose. And in a way that didn't reject the people, that integrated them. It didn't lose the quality of all about the people that was in the first book. But it moved beyond it and put it in context. And that context was all about the purpose of why we're building software. And it was, you could feel it in that book, and the energy was different. It wasn't angry anymore. It was mature. It was not just trying to prove that the conventional doesn't work. It was, of course, that's obvious. And it was just so much more graceful. You could see that same differentiator in a lot of the teams and the instructors teaching Agile, the consultants doing Agile. You could really feel that difference where you had some teams that were in that first phase, which we went through as well. I think it's a natural space to go through. And it was like, it's that first step is the recognition. Oh my God, there are people here, and our processes are limiting and constraining them, and it's naturally trying to embrace and embody that people-centric energy, reject what came before to differentiate from it. But then there's that next step of now integrating all that together in a way that is really more focused on the purpose.
Well, I think some of that really had to come from and we see this in Holacracy, and if you were familiar with Holacracy in the early days, there was a lot of, there's a better way, this is ridiculous, why can't people do this or that? But I think a lot of it really came from trying to, you mentioned differentiate, but also these ideas that going back to the industrial way of doing things, of just this idea that we're struggling with the peopleware. I guess the book is probably the seminal work for that. Just the idea that people couldn't be, in software development, it was very limiting to think that if you added 4 developers onto something, it's going to make it go 4 times as fast. And there were things like that were just changing with software development that we hadn't seen previously. I mean, Toyota did it with Lean, and they did such a great job with production, but there were just these things that were really just, you could really just couldn't hide from it anymore, that the way wasn't working. And I think we see some of this also, I mean, a lot of that was good footwork for Holacracy, but also as we're differentiating with Holacracy, there's just some things that it's just coming to light, and you really have to point it out just so that it's obvious, right? So the corollary in software development was you can't make a baby. It doesn't, 9 pregnant women
can't make a baby in a month.
Right. So, and I think you see sort of these things with Holacracy where we're starting to really tear apart what's no longer useful in our conventional businesses. But it's really kind of difficult because people are so used to it, they don't see this. They've kind of gone down the road of it, and they're so used to, you throw more people on the factory floor and it'll get done faster. but until it's not working, then they just try to throw more at it, which was what happened in Agile. And I think that's some of what we've learned in Holacracy is, in order to make the paradigm shift obvious, you have to really make it obvious. And
Yep,
that was,
absolutely.
I think that was one of the great things that they did in Agile.
Yeah, and to your point, we saw the same evolution in our work with Holacracy. Earlier in us getting Holacracy out there, it had that same quality of pushing against to differentiate from what came before, um, and then maturing up in something altogether novel and different and having a really solid ground to it that didn't need to push against something before because it was cohesive and purpose-driven. Um, and yeah, that was I think really a good point. And the other thing I was going to add with agile methods as well, there's a value in clarity, and some of that I think was pointed to by what you were just saying. It's difficult to throw more people at something when the fundamental nature of the work is not just a kind of brute force, just do more manual effort. It's think more clearly, and software is really just an externalization and a capturing of a thought process in a way. And for that, the value that we need is clarity. Clarity matters. It's how you think about it is so key. And the same is true in the vast majority of the knowledge work that we do in organizations. You can do more and more and more work and not add any more value. The key is, what is your work? This is David Allen quotes. I think it might be Drucker that he quotes. I forget exactly where the quote came from, but he says the quote that he quotes is for the knowledge worker. The hardest thing is defining what is work. What is the work. And I think that's very true in our organizations today, with everything but the just brute force manual labor kind of stuff. What is the work? What is the work of a manager, an executive, a scientist? It's all really about how we think and trying to be clear on what makes sense to do in the first place. And I think that's what Agile did in software development was provide processes and systems to get clarity on what really needed to be done. So we weren't just throwing things at it, our ideas of what we thought maybe should be done from a predicted space, but to get real feedback from reality, from actual usage of a software, to really uncover at the root what really needed to be done, and to integrate that to get clarity. And then to get clarity in the development team. Okay, well, what are we really trying to do? The value in one of the Agile practices is test-first development, where you actually build a test before you write the code that you're testing. And one of the main values in doing that is so that you know when you are done, because the test defines your work. It says, here's what you actually need to do. So you're clear, you need to make this test work. Which is not that different than in Holacracy, how we capture a project. And the language we use to capture a project is a true or false statement, which acts as a test that when you can say this statement is true, your project is done. Community of practice call recorded and posted to website. There's a statement that you can say, true or false. Is that true? Once that's true, you are done. And you write that first, and then you go do the work to make that true. And again, the value that we see there is one of clarity on what the work actually is. And in addition to all the testing benefits you get in Agile's test-first practices, you get clarity. And I think that's just so key for any kind of knowledge work. And Holacracy takes that influence to the whole organization. And some of that influence came from David Allen's work as well, which is also all about getting clarity in knowledge work. And it systemizes it, and now we can have a process to get clarity, just like Agile has a process to get clarity around what the work is, so does Holacracy. We have a process of listening to reality, integrating feedback continually from that reality to get clarity on what is the work of the organization to express its purpose. And it's all anchored in that purpose. What is the work we need to do to express the purpose? And instead of just trying to guess that, let's listen to reality to find out what it really is, and to integrate all of that.
I think there's also a shift of the shift from not just more people on it to more perspectives. And this is something that I think we do really well in Holacracy, but In the Agile space, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the concept of pair programming, where you have two programmers working together on just to program at the same time. And the idea is that you're looking at the software from two different places, and you're getting two heads in the game. And it's also to kind of get more people to spread knowledge, but sort of what I saw as the main point of it is to be able to integrate perspectives in real time as you're doing the software. One person's maybe thinking about the code as you're coding it, and somebody else is thinking about the system or however they're going to approach it. And we also see this, I mean, I know that you'll see this in a lot of organizational structures as well, but then the cross-functional teams, where let's include the customer as a person on the team with the programmers. So, and the tester, and whoever else is involved in creating and specifying the software, to make sure we get those multiple perspectives integrated every time. And then I think that Agile software development really, I mean, they don't talk about it a lot, but they really do roles pretty well at a very specific case. You have your product owner in Scrum, or customer in some of the other methods. The product owner they're holding the vision of the software. They have authority and final say as to what goes into the software, so that it doesn't just become an amalgam of what everybody thinks should be in software or in this particular software. Things like that, I think they do pretty well with giving you a preset set of roles for that. And I think that really kind of played into, I don't know how much it influenced it, but I think that it maybe subconsciously influenced the idea of authority. And I don't know, Brian, you might have to speak to that a little bit more than me.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, and in fact, it points to one of the limits as well of Agile methods that I've heard from a number of people that are out there doing them, which is Agile method. The various methods, take Scrum for example. Scrum is one of the Agile methods, and it gives you a template for the roles that you need on your team. You have a Scrum Master role, you have a Product Owner role, you have Developer role, right? And what it doesn't do, though, is give you any process, any meta process, to change those roles or to update them. And that right there is one of its major limits. So those template definitions are great, pretty good most of the time. They fit 80% of the situations 80% of the time, right? But one of the principles of Agile is local adaptation. There's no one-size-fits-all process. You have to adapt it to your local context. What Agile doesn't offer is a meta process to adopt those roles, to adapt those roles itself. What happens when you're in an environment where your product owner needs to be a little different, or your Scrum Master needs to be a little different? Which means it relies still on a heroic leader saying, here's what we're doing, right? Which is ironic, because Agile is trying to get away from the heroic top-down control, and yet it relies on heroic top-down control to even itself say, we're doing Agile. Right? So this is one of the interesting paradoxes built in. And likewise, it relies on that heroic top-down control to change the way we're doing Agile itself. So when maybe we decide Scrum is not the right fit for us, we should be using extreme programming, or vice versa. Or Scrum's great, but we need to tweak something in how we do it. The irony is, how do you do that? It typically takes some heroic top-down leader saying we're going to do it differently. Or it takes consensus. But even the consensus is granted by virtue of some heroic leader saying, yes, we will come to consensus. And even then, it becomes all about us and the people instead of what really makes sense given the work. And we risk some personal agendas getting in the way. So for all of that, that's where I think Agile really stops. It doesn't have a meta process to define the process. And where Holacracy, what Holacracy does here that I think is truly the really powerful shift is put the power in the Constitution, so in a process that is documented and written, including a process for updating the process. So with Holacracy at play, you now have a way to locally adapt the power itself and the process itself, the way we're doing it. So we have a way to change the role of Scrum Master or developer, or to add more clarity around what we really need the developers to do in this environment, or what have you. And that meta process itself honors all the basic principles of lots of learning and feedback, honoring multiple perspectives, all of that. So this is and that's not a knocking of Agile. It's gone amazingly far. It's just the limit of where they went to with it, and no wonder. It's not meant to be an entire organizational governance system. But that is the power in Holacracy, is to shift that power into a process, a constitution documenting that process, and one that itself can be evolved.
One of the challenges that you have in Agile software development, that at least that I had seen in the community, was that they really earn the team earns its authority through almost merit, just by working. So the rest of the organization doesn't really quite know how to integrate with that. You have this team, but they're doing whatever they're doing is working, right? So the team might be running in this new paradigm shift. The rest of the organization isn't, and I think that is one of the challenges that we've seen out there, is just that they don't know how to capitalize on that throughout the entire organization, that whole paradigm shift, especially when you have a team that's running with it already and doing such a good job. And I think that any good Agile team would feel pretty at home with Holacracy. I think that it fits. The paradigm is just pointing. I mean, there's so many things that point to this paradigm. It's not just Holacracy. It's not just some genius of Holacracy that's saying, "Hey, listen to reality." It's just the practices, I think, are more formalized across an organization. But I do think that an Agile team that's they're probably very well trained at this point to be able to pick up Holacracy. They already know about discipline. They know about sticking to practices, and they understand the principles behind it. And I think it's a great way. Personally, I think it's a great way, of course, to integrate an Agile team into a rest of an organization, capitalize on Agile throughout the organization. I'm not sure where. When I was in the Agile community, there was a lot of talk about enterprise Agile, the idea of bringing this across the organization. And I'm not really sure how that is meshed out or not, as far as how they've gotten. I know we've tried before Holacracy, we tried some of the Agile practices in other parts of the organization, pair-executiving, we would call it, where we would work together on certain things that weren't software development related or whatever. But I feel like I kind of got off topic. But I do think that an Agile team would feel very comfortable, because it kind of comes from the same place. The paradigm shift comes from the same place.
Yes, and that's not to say there won't be challenges. There will. There are some ways in which what you need for developing software with Agile principles is different than what you need for developing an organization with Agile principles. So there are some things that will feel non-intuitive or uncomfortable at first. And in fact, I usually warn anyone adopting Holacracy to expect that. If it doesn't feel uncomfortable, you're doing something wrong. And in the same way that moving from a predict and control software development process to an Agile one is going to feel weird at first. It's going to take dropping things you know are good ideas. If you're used to doing software in a waterfall predict and control method, it feels like a really good idea to anticipate and try to design everything up front, and because of course you want good design. And when somebody says, no, drop all that upfront prediction and design, it sounds like they're saying drop good design, which they're not. They're saying drop the way you get to good design and replace it with a more effective way. The same is true with the shift to Holacracy. It's going to say drop things that you think are good ideas. But it's not saying drop the value of them. It's saying there's a better way to get to the value of them, and one that might feel non-intuitive at first. So I do think there's a natural alignment, and anyone that's really embodying an Agile practice is a good candidate for moving to Holacracy. And Holacracy does take those same principles and infuse them across the entire way we organize and express the purpose at play. But that's not to say it won't be without challenges at the same time. And I also see a comment here in the chat. Toria asked a question. Can you say more about how Holacracy isn't just making it easier to create really bad things very fast and efficiently? So, how does it kind of build in or help ensure that what you're doing is actually valuable? I think the interesting thing about this, in some ways, it's not. Reality does that. What Holacracy does is expose you to reality. Said another way, what Holacracy does is get you clear on the purpose as best we understand it. What is the purpose or the creative potential that this organization is trying to express? And then everything gets organized around that consciously. If what you've tuned into as your creative potential, your purpose, if that itself isn't valuable, Holacracy will expose you to that reality really quick. Likewise, if you're doing something, whatever it might be, you've taken on a project that isn't really valuable to the purpose, Holacracy will also expose that really quick. It's almost more the reality of that situation, the uncomfortable reality that Holacracy just holds up a mirror to. So rather than necessarily enforcing it, what it does is turn the lights on it.
Reducing waste, I think, is a kind of a big piece of that. So at least if you're going to make something really unvaluable, you do it much more quickly. And so you can see if it's not valuable for whatever the purpose is. Now, that's not to say judgment of good and bad, what that actually is, but valuable or not valuable, work product or whatnot. I think that, and that's one of the things that you get to, one of the Agile principles, fail fast.
Yeah,
I mean, you're going to do it. You might as well just do it quicker and get the information you need.
Yes, and and to that point, the transparency is a key way of counteracting the idea of doing something, really not valuable really efficiently. The more radically transparent the whole process is, the more opportunity you have for somebody involved to notice that and catch it. And then Holacracy gives the processes to feed that back into. So, it's one thing for somebody to go off and work on something that isn't known. This happens actually in conventional software development all the time, where there's not much transparency. You'll get some developer off coding on a pet project that isn't really valuable to the purpose at play. But they'll be, dutifully coding away, sometimes for weeks before anyone realizes they're wasting time. What Agile does is bring a radical transparency. They're going to get up in front of their team and have transparency on what they're working on every day. And it's much harder to hide in that environment. So it's not that it directly prevents it. Rather, it just turns the lights on. So when it happens, it's seen quickly, and we can adapt. And I think Holacracy does the same thing within a work team. It makes a radical transparency, especially with its tactical meeting process, which is built on or relies on whatever's output from our governance meetings. The tactical meetings have a rapid feedback component and a transparent component. So that brings more opportunities for more of the sensors, us humans, as sensors of the organization. We humans show up sensing reality, and the more we can see of that reality, the more opportunity we have for one sensor to kind of ring an alarm bell. And then the processes of Holacracy make sure that any one sensor that senses something that's off has a way to integrate that, even if none of the other sensors are aware of it. And that, I think, is another force that counteracts that. And then finally, if your purpose itself is off, if you've just tuned into a purpose that is just not that valuable to the world, reality will tell you that too. You won't get customers. You'll get it out there fast, and no one will respond. And that's not just true in the big picture of the purpose of the whole company, but the purpose of any circle within the company, the purpose of any project within the company. Any of that, if it's not valuable, if you get something out there fast, you'll know it, which gives you the opportunity to adapt it and to make it valuable.
That's that 80% of features that no users are going to use.
Yeah, exactly. I see another comment here. To your point, Toria, the holarchic structure also, because this structure isn't just something at the top, it's echoed throughout the organization. That you've got all sensors firing. You're riding on the capacity of every sensor, every human in that organization, and their full capacity to sense reality on behalf of the purpose at play. And you have channels and methods for channeling any tension sensed by anyone, anywhere in the organization, to wherever it can go to get processed rapidly and reliably, to evolve the organization and harness the learning available. That's key. And that really keeps us out of a lot of the traps I think we see in conventional organizations. And again, as I'm talking, I'm aware of just how many parallels there are here for what Agile does in a software team and what Holacracy does in a whole organization. It keeps us out of predict and control and all the traps and stuck points. It integrates feedback and learning continually, ruthlessly facing reality, even when the reality is uncomfortable and we would rather hide it from ourselves, which I see happening in conventional software projects and conventional organization all the time. One of the things Agile does is prevent you from hiding reality from yourself. And it's a pain in the ass. There are days that you really would rather your nice illusion because it's much more comfortable than the reality of where your software project is really headed. But at least that gives you the opportunity to feel tension about it and to do something with that and adapt it. And Holacracy does the same damn thing with organization. It turns the lights on, it shines the transparent light of day on reality, and it gives us the opportunity to adapt. There's so much in that core paradigm shift that informed Holacracy in its development. It's really probably among the biggest influences, I would think. What do you think?
There might also be, yeah, absolutely. And I think there might also be just some of the ways that it was pioneered by Agile, just some of the things that they ran into, or very similar things that we run into, and we don't have to trip over those same obstacles as much because the Agile community has already gone through them. You know, we talk about the idea of not doing anything, and we'll call it Agile. You know, you see the same thing. Oh, we're doing Holacracy. You know,
yeah, you
and that's
see that.
we did non-Agile in ternary in the early days. Yeah, we're using Agile. You know, and I think it's really helped us communicate. You know, no, you need the discipline and the practices to be actually using this. And I think that there's really a lot that has. Just the principles have really formed our thinking. I don't know. I mean, I know there's a lot of things that are out there that are also pointing to this paradigm shift, but I really feel like if we weren't doing a software development company, and if Toria wasn't software development and we weren't using Agile, we would either be doing a lot of this stuff much more slowly, or it would never have come to fruition. I would say that Agile is one of the biggest contributors. They just did so much, the pioneers of that did just so much work at communicating it, really getting that out there, and there's a lot of stuff that we would struggle with if we didn't have the Agile base to pull back from.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, especially because the actual processes and structures and methods look nothing alike. But the paradigm is there and it's clear. And that to me is the fascinating thing. It's the same general principles, at least mostly the same general principles, and same general underlying paradigm applied in a completely different domain, which results in completely different structure and output. The other interesting thing to express here, how Holacracy itself was designed, was with a very agile process. So in the development of Holacracy, which continues, and we're on version 3.0 of Holacracy now as we've version numbered it. But as the ongoing evolution of Holacracy has progressed, it has been an agile process. In the same way that in software development, when you're adopting Agile, what it stops you from doing is trying to guess and create from your mind all these things you think your market wants, and instead shift you to actually listening to the reality of what's needed. And it gets you out of that predict and control design method. So too has the process of Holacracy unfolded, where I think whenever we find something that's off or missing or just not working or not right in Holacracy, it's invariably one of the creative, clever ideas that we put into it because we thought it was needed or was a good idea, as opposed to something that emerged from listening to the reality of how people show up in organization and using that to sense what's needed in Agile itself, or in Holacracy itself. And that is actually how the development process it has not been a process of adding our ideas to it. It's been a process of stripping away our ideas to listen to the reality of what's actually needed. Much like the sculptor, revealing the form that's already in the block of stone. It's already in the marble. It's a matter of chipping away, and it's done when there's nothing left to remove, not nothing left to add. Right? I love that metaphor, and it's the development of Holacracy itself has been, again, watching how people show up, how they meet, how they make decisions, how they organize, and looking for anything that's a smell of conventional, a smell of politics. There's a smell. Anytime where we see people influencing through politics, or lack of clarity and lack of a process to get clarity, or attention that can't be processed. Whenever we've seen any of those, that's a sign that there's something else needed in the fundamental operating system of the organization. And that is how Holacracy itself has developed and evolved. It's by sensing those things and just getting really down to the reality of, well, there it is, it's obvious, which has meant Holacracy itself is not a designed system. Nobody stepped back and, made this big, brilliant design of this is what's needed in the world. I think if we had tried, or to the extent we did try, it was the wrong stuff. What it was getting back to the ultimate core reality of what's actually needed. And that's what makes Holacracy so damn powerful, I think. It is the way it itself has evolved, has been with that ruthlessly facing reality, getting our own ideas out of the way, and continually evolving and adapting. So, well, I guess that's about a wrap. We're about out of time. Lex, anything in closing you want to express as we call it a day?
No, I love Agile. I always have.
Yeah, cool. Great. Well, thanks for those who joined us. And if you have more thoughts to share, by all means, please do post on the forums and the community practice. And thanks, everyone, for listening. And a final respectful nod to all of the pioneers of these Agile methods for everything they contributed to the development of what we now call Holacracy. So thank you, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.